Marco Rubio has a new campaign ad that is set to play in Iowa, and it is surprisingly short on information about his actual policies. In fact, it's stressing something else entirely. Let's watch.
Our goal is eternity, the ability to live alongside our Creator for all time, to accept the free gift of salvation offered to us by Jesus Christ. The struggle on a daily basis as a Christian is to remind ourselves of this. The purpose of our life is to cooperate with God's plan. To those who much has been given, much is expected, and we will be asked to account for that. Were your treasures stored up on earth or in heaven? And to me, I try to allow that to influence me in everything that I do. I'm Marco Rubio, and I approved of this message.
Yeah.
Jesus.
What religion was he again?
I'm pretty sure he's Jewish. What's weird is that he's looking off camera like he's being interviewed. So it's like I'm staring like this, right?
Yeah.
And so that means somebody's asking him questions, which means if you go back and listen to those answers, what the hell are those questions that have prompted
What could have possibly led
prompted those answers?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it would have been better to have him look in camera directly for that instead of making it seem like, oh, we've just taken an excerpt from Earth's most puzzling conversation.
Exactly, about mythology. And and the idea that he's responding to questions when it has been so clearly scripted.
Yeah,
I mean, that is a level of inauthenticity that
that's right.
politicians rarely meet.
That is an incredibly inauthentic moment, but I guess that the only people, you're trying to reach a very specific brand of evangelical voter there and assure them that, hey, no, I'm one of you, right? And that's what that attempt is to do. It's just, it was a nicer time when deeply religious people felt that would be played close to the vest, but at least in the Republican Party, that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that. Maybe that is too lacking in subtlety, maybe. But I think that they'll probably like that ad because it's not like, I'm not saying, when I say that he's inauthentic, I don't mean that he doesn't believe that stuff on some level.
No, I think he clearly...
He believes it.
No, he's a deeply religious man and believes it. That's okay. But who's he talking to? Who are you talking to?
He's talking to nobody.
Can we hear one part of that just to imagine what the question is? Just play one little part.
Of this. The purpose of our life is to cooperate with God's plan. To those who much has been given, much is expected. And we will be asked to account for that.
And look at my wife.
The treasures stored up on earth or in heaven. And to me, I try to allow that to influence me in everything that I do. I'm Marco Rubio, and I approved of this message.
Yeah, he's got a lovely
Marco,
family and
I'm
he's
curious,
a religious man.
What's expected of those who too much has been given?
What exactly?
Yeah, I'm curious, Marco.
A lot, actually. And so, look, I think obviously there is supposed to be, and there is, for regular people who haven't been totally corrupted by the system and by campaign finance, there is a connection between our values and our policies. And many people believe that those values come from religion. I don't think that's actually the way it works, but for a lot of people, that's the way it's supposed to work. And so this is a shortcut to saying I share the same values as you. But when even inside of Christianity, there are so many different groups who disagree on so many different metaphysical concepts, let alone the actual policies, why not skip that and just talk about the values? And then hopefully have a meaningful and reasonable and direct connection between those values and your policies. So he says, are your treasures on earth or are they on heaven? Okay, so you're supposed to be not focusing on material goods here. You're supposed to be focusing on the spiritual goods. So what does he generally think about the extremely wealthy? Does he seem like a man who is judging the fact that they want to have all their treasures here on earth? No, he doesn't seem like that at all. So why talk about that BS when it apparently doesn't actually influence the way that you would lead, the way that you think about politics and about society?
I'm going to disagree with you because I don't think it'll work. I think that Rubio, who has impressed some people during debates, including me, but reasonable people are significantly split on that, right? Because take someone like Michael Schur, he's been very unimpressed with Rubio during the debates. But I think he seems pretty good when answering a question, and he seems kind of large and in charge, overcoming what Cenk sees as his boyishness, right? So but here, everything about him that is O'Malley-like and kind of somewhat skin-crawly and reptilian comes out in this ad.
That's the word.
So I find this inauthentic, and I imagine, sure, okay, it's possible that he will assure some people that he's significantly religious enough, but you're trying to win a Republican primary here. You'll assure everybody that you're religious enough in that crowd if you were able to get to the general election. I just don't, again, Trump is winning this election, and Cruz is doing well too, because both of these guys, and Carson was for a while, the guys who seem most real, and Cruz is revolting in every way to me, and I think more dangerous than Donald Trump would be as president. I would take Trump over Cruz right now.
I haven't decided yet, but I understand
forced to choose.
The position.
But they are genuine. That's one reason why they are doing well.
Yeah.
Trump in particular, but all of those guys. And Rubio isn't, and Jeb Bush isn't. And they are having and Christie, oddly enough, who has moments of it, isn't right now either. He seems to be trying, and so I feel like ads like that.
I think you probably won't.
That is a failure, and it reminds us, of course, of another ad that was the definitive definition of a guy desperately trying to establish his religious bona fides and just repulsing everyone who saw the ad, and that was Mark Pryor's ad late in the race to hold on to his Senate seat in 2012 or 2010?
I think it's 2012.
I think 2012. He lost to Tom Cotton. Here's Mark Pryor's ad from 4 years ago. It's great.
I'm not ashamed to say that I believe in God and I believe in His Word. The Bible teaches us no one has all the answers, only God does, and neither political party is always right. This is my compass, my North Star. It gives me comfort and guidance to do what's best for Arkansas. I'm Mark Pryor, and I approve this message because this is who I am and what I believe.
That worked so well, it led to this speech, which is video 6.
Tonight, the people have spoken. I've just called Tom Cotton to congratulate him on his victory, and I want you to know that he will be in my prayers.
But it was 2014. Edwin, thank you for checking
A lot
that.
of people can fit in your prayers. You're not going to be holding office anymore. You got the time.
God, that was 15 months ago.
Yeah, that was very
That's
recent.
amazing. Yeah,
Neither party is always right.
Oh my God.
So, vote for me or the exact opposite. Whatever, doesn't bother me.
He got like less than 40% of the vote as an
He deserved less than 40%.
incumbent senator.
I do want to look at the current state of the evangelical vote in Iowa. So let's bring up this graphic. You see there, this is it's getting on towards a month ago. A lot can change in that time. But then Cruz had the evangelical vote 34%, Trump with 24%, and then Rubio down at 12%. It is possible that since then Rubio has risen a bit. It's possible this ad could help. I totally get the inauthenticity, but I wonder if regular people who are only paying a little bit of attention in Iowa, they may not analyze it at that level. They may just like that he obviously delivers the lines with more authentic spirituality than when Trump at one of his rallies holds up a Bible and says, "This is awesome. I love this."
Right, but there's a degree of even the way Trump says it is authentic. Like he somehow is able to transcend. Like, hey, this is the part where I have to pretend that I'm really Christian. Okay, I love it. I love the Bible. Okay, where are we going next? And people are like, that guy. So it's he has a magic to him. There's no question. Though,
what's your favorite verse? That's not a fair question.
Right.
You know what? In my experience, Christians like talking about their favorite parts of the Bible.
Yeah, that's right.
The idea that that's below the belt. I don't like that.
Interesting piece today in the Los Angeles Times about Rubio because he's been criticized for missing so many Senate votes because he's out running for president.
Yeah.
But he's not beating the bushes in Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina running for president. He is doing things like making this ad.
Yeah.
His entire campaign is built largely on rallies that are designed for a television audience, making these television commercials and appearing on the cable news shows. He is not reading directly from the LA Times. Strategy is built on a preference for made-for-TV rallies, cable news appearances, rather than the endless handshaking and baby kissing that tradition suggests paves the way to the White House. His approach has GOP strategists questioning whether Rubio is willing to do the grinding work of retail politics required to win the early nominating states. There will probably come a point in this country when retail politics goes out the window. But not as long, I suspect, as we're opening with Iowa and New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Iowa, if Iowa had a primary, the retail politicking wouldn't matter as much, but it's a caucus, and so it matters enormously. And it matters in New Hampshire because you can literally almost meet everyone. Yeah, so those are two very particular states where it does matter, and he's not doing it. He's making a deliberate attempt not to do it. The result is, I think, ads like this, and I think a moment where it has seemed, whatever it was, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, when you thought, wow, it is definitely not going to be Jeb Bush. His debate performances have been impressive, and we thought, okay, here comes the establishment. We'll just simply go, okay, not Jeb, Marco. We'll move to him. The establishment is comfortable with Rubio, and it will be Rubio and Trump, and therefore, because it can't be Trump, it'll be Rubio.
Yeah, and some of the money is already over there.
But then he just never moved.
This is something that I believe is true of Marco Rubio. Maybe this is obvious. I love when I say things that are abundantly clear to everybody. That isn't really true of any of the other candidates. So Marco Rubio is doing okay. He's doing better than some of the other people that we wouldn't necessarily have assumed he would do better than. He's still very young, and he is a senator, and he's probably going to continue to be a senator, and the country is only going to become a higher percentage Hispanic. Naturally, that's the demographic trends. If he does pretty well here, doesn't make a fool of himself, there's no reason he can't run again in 4, 8, 12, 16 years.
It's a question of what he does in the interim.
That's true.
But yeah, I agree, unless his result here is somehow embarrassing, but I doubt.
Which it hasn't been.
No, it hasn't been. I mean, it is hard to imagine that he didn't. And then Ted Cruz just totally took his place, and Cruz filled that gap. And now, because the theory is the establishment, that both those guys are unpalatable to the establishment, unless at some point establishment people rally behind Cruz because they can't stand the idea of Trump. Or, by the way, the other way around. So that calculation that has the sort of Republican establishment, whatever that exactly means, saying, well, we can't have Trump, so we got to settle on Cruz. There is a school of thought among some very smart people that they'll go the other way, is that they'll think,
that's possible.
no, we'll settle on Trump, so it isn't Cruz. But in the interim, what will be interesting to all of us, since nobody knows what's going to happen, is that if we take it at face value that at least for a little bit, Trump and Cruz are safe, that they're not about to get knocked out of the race coming up here. Although if Trump gets less than 10% in Iowa, which would be glorious, then that might change the calculus. But then who's the third person? Who sort of emerges as the other person who would then be an establishment choice? That might not be enough to win.
Gilmore.
Will it be Christie? Will it be Rubio? Or will it be
Carson?
no, not Carson. Will it be Bush? Those are the only people with any chance at all.